TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
Home Abstract and Title Company was founded in 1867 and is the oldest company still operating in McLennan County. Home Abstract is comprised of a team of honest, friendly, hardworking professionals dedicated to providing both commercial and residential real estate clients with the highest level of communication and service. Their team is committed to working hard and building and maintaining strong relationships because transactions are so much more than just deals. They are clients, deserving of the courtesy, care, and respect that Home Abstract and Title Company is known for. Visit Home Abstract and Title Company at homeabstract.com.
Cross the Brazos and Waco, ride hard and I'll make it by dawn. Cross the Brazos and Waco, I'm safe when I reach San Antonio.
All right, welcome back to the Waco History Podcast. We are deep into the Crossroads series that Rick has been helping me with. Rick, welcome back.
Stephen, what number is this?
Yeah, it depends on how you count them. And it's best not to, but I would just say we're somewhere in the middle. We're not at the beginning, and we're definitely not at the end. We're somewhere in the middle.
We're at a crossroads, kind of?
Yeah, we're at a crossroads and the bridge may or may not be out.
All right.
But we've been bringing in guests to help us, and today we're talking about Waco as Crossroads of Commerce. And so would you introduce our guest for us?
Yes, I'd like to introduce Kris Collins. She is Vice President at the Greater Waco Chamber of Commerce and in charge of economic development. Kris, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into this Crossroads episode on the economics of
greatest
Waco.
Fears.
No.
Yeah.
Let's just, you grew up here in Waco.
Yeah. So moved to Waco in the early 90s, went to Conley High School, graduated in 96, left and went to University of Texas and had a really good time in Austin for a while, and ended up marrying a Waco boy. Came back to the community at the end of 2004, started working at the chamber in 2005, and so in May I will celebrate my 18th anniversary of working at the chamber.
Yeah, so describe what your job is.
So my job, my job in economic development, nobody picks economic development as a career choice. Everybody falls into it. I had the opportunity after I graduated from college to work for the city of Round Rock and was exposed to economic development by working with the mayor and seeing the relationship that city had with their Chamber of Commerce to help attract new industry. And so when my husband and I decided to move back to Waco, I was thinking about where my path would go. And I was at a crossroads of where I would go.
Good use.
Yes.
Yeah, I wish we had a sounder that we could put in there for that. Yeah.
But I really enjoyed learning about that. And there was an opportunity available at the Chamber of Commerce. And so what economic development is about creating opportunity and prosperity for all. It's about creating commerce within the community, creating opportunities for employment and wealth, so that everyone benefits from growth. And so my job and my partners within the organization, we work together to attract new industrial business to the community, which has a spin-off effect to help create additional commerce within the community, new jobs all the way around, and hopefully everybody, the boat lifts with everyone.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I think I've heard you use the term, it's primary sector.
Correct.
You're looking for primary sector employers. Not that you're against the secondary and tertiary, but retail, stuff like that usually comes if you have a large amount of primary.
Yes. So diving into the weeds of it a little bit, primary sector jobs create new new dollars into the community. So you have a manufacturer that is making a product, that product ships out, and it's generating new dollars into the community that didn't exist before. Those dollars are then paid to employees, to other businesses for services, and so you're recirculating into the secondary economy. But we want to bring new money in that then benefits creates more of a ripple effect.
And actually, as we get into our story on Waco, I think that's good to know. It's good to understand how the economy of Waco grew and was able to do that using primary and secondary and all that stuff. Yep. So, thanks for that background.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. So let's dive in. Let's think about the journey of Waco, its economic journey through history. But first, we kind of have to look at Texas as a whole. And today, Texas is, if you looked at our economy today, we're one of the 9th largest economies in the world, right?
Yeah, when we secede, it'll be the 9th largest
That's
economy.
A different podcast.
Okay.
Totally different podcast. So if you think about, about the time Waco came online in 1850-ish, right, when McLennan County was founded, that's their dead start, right? They're starting with nothing. There's no economy really. There's a little bit of trading going on at Torrey's Trading Post, or maybe a little bit of ag with a few of the early settlers, but and then Texas as a whole is still moving. In fact, an interesting stat I pulled was in 1850, there were just 212,000 people in all of Texas.
Yeah.
So that's less than the population of Waco today. And they're competing. The East Coast states had a huge head start. New York had over 3 million people.
Yeah.
So, you got the little old backwater Texas, that's starting out as a state, having to compete with these other states back east that have been around for hundreds of years in some cases.
Well, I love your show note here that it's the 2000 census when Texas actually passes New York in total population of 20 million, which is really interesting. So what's going on this whole time period we're going to be looking at is that slow process of Texas growing and,
right,
of course, eventually New York shrinking a little bit.
Well, and population's not, a completely accurate correlation to economic activity, but it's a pretty close one, I think.
Yeah, you have to think about how much of a head start they had and how long it took Texas to overcome that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I found it interesting because, obviously I lived through that time, and I'm in my 2023.
This was 1850
no.
to 2000.
I'm going back to the point of us surpassing New York, which was in my lifetime in the 2000 census. And sitting here from the perspective of 2023, I'm almost thinking, oh, we've never been smaller than New York. We're Texas.
Yeah.
But
pretty remarkable.
That's how it played out.
I think you're right, though, Rick. Really the story of kind of economic development. And, of course, Kris, we're doing this, Waco is Crossroads is kind of what we've been thinking about and talked about Waco's Crossroads in a lot of different ways. If we think about primary drivers, that was really good that you kind of framed that for us because that's what we're talking about, right? What were the big engines of the economy over time in Waco's Crossroads? It's really a post-Civil War story where that kicks off, right?
Right. And a couple other points I'd make about the Texas economy, kind of framing the development of Texas. Galveston was the largest city in Texas up until 1890. And you think about that. It was the port city for Texas. Everything came through Galveston. You go to it now, you visit it. It's a beautiful place with a bunch of old buildings and museums, but you don't think of it as a powerhouse.
Yeah.
But it was the powerhouse of Texas until San Antonio took it over. And then San Antonio held that role until the 30s when Houston finally took it over and remains the largest city today.
Which is an era you lived through as well. So Houston becoming the largest city in Texas.
I've been in Houston, and I'm glad I'm in Waco. Let me just say that.
Well, if we look at, say, the 19th, early 20th century as a series of booms, maybe framing it that way, where would we start, Rick?
Okay, so there were basically up until the modern economy, let's say after 2000, Texas was really driven by 4 areas that boomed and bust at different times. So cattle was one of them. So we think about how was Waco positioned for that one? Well, we were part of the Chisholm Trail, and remember the early cattle economy was, hey, let's go round up some of those free cows out in the range and drive them somewhere and sell them for a profit. And that also included not just cattle, but the bison. They provided economic output for early settlers because they could sell those hides. They could sell those bones eventually for fertilizer. It was kind of a free resource, as well as other hides that we talked about, like with the Indians trading with the Tory Trading Company and what all that drove in that early kind of frontier economy. Cotton was the other big one.
Yeah, but I think of those really differently, right? I mean, cattle, you've got cattle coming through on the Chisholm Trail, but as far as how much capital that's really creating here locally had to be fairly limited. Right.
We don't have exact numbers, but because we were a crossroads, because we had one of the few crossings on the Brazos River for them to get up and over. Now, of course, they could come through, and if it was drier, they would not cross maybe necessarily across the bridge, but they would come near Waco, and they would come into Waco and spend their money.
Right.
Leisure is a big part of our tourism is a big part of our economy now in Waco, which has been a change in more recent times. But I think then it was, this business tourism of the cattle drives. And it'll be interesting. We'll look in a minute, maybe some of the businesses that were in Waco then that catered to those folks. And really that lasted from 1860s to the early 1900s. I mean, there's still cattle today, but as far as being
I've seen cattle. Yeah. But I mean, this period of drives is really over by the 1880s. And so, it remains an industry, but not the boom, I guess is the word we're using, not the boom that it was.
Right. And I'm going to save cotton because we'll talk about it more in depth. Lumber was another big one. We didn't, looking at the Waco area, obviously we don't have the forests of East Texas. That's really where a lot of that came out of. There was some forest around here that got used for local, usage. But I think a big opportunity came when William Cameron located his headquarters here in Waco. And that's a good story. We can get into that a little more in a minute. But we did see some of the benefit of that lumber economy. And then I think another one to frame just from a Texas standpoint, which goes without saying, was oil. Right. So in the late or early 1900s, the very end of the 1800s, they started finding oil and gas in Texas. Of course, that coincided with a lot of great things going on, the automobile, some big shifts and changes in the world economy. And Texas turned out to be resource rich. And that definitely dictated how a lot of communities in Texas grew.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, prior to that period, there's not a huge market for oil. I mean, it's really the automobile and the turn toward that as a fuel source that creates a market about the same time that these new discoveries are made.
Yeah. The interesting part of that, as it relates to Waco, is there's relatively no oil production in McLennan County. If you pulled up a map that showed, had marked on it every oil and gas well in Texas, you'd see this great map, and you'd see a lot of cities that
donut hole
that have a lot of oil and gas in their backyard, and then there's Waco in the middle of Central Texas with literally almost nothing.
Yeah,
and in fact, of the 26 MSA, what does MSA stand for?
Metropolitan Statistical Area.
Yes. And that's used by the Department of Labor or some other
census. Yeah.
It's used by a number of different departments, and it's a federal designation that gives geographical areas that have economies that are dependent upon one another.
Gotcha. So Waco is its own MSA.
Yes.
And there's 26 of these throughout the state. So just think of every kind of mid-sized city and up.
Yeah. So they're
Roughly.
large metros, they're mega metros,
Right.
they're micro metros.
True. Okay. And if you, of the 26 of them, I think just looking at that map I just described, there's only 2 or 3 of them that don't have an oil play.
Mm.
You know, us, Temple Belton, and, you know, there's not really anything around Austin,
Right.
the Austin area.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else has oil and gas somewhere in their economy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think that's what we'll see drove some of the early leaders into developing the economy that we now get to enjoy. And we can get into that more as we move on. Yeah, so let's jump in. It's Waco in 1850. What's going on?
With very small scale cotton production in town. I mean, there's not a lot of, there's trading that we've already talked about and established, but it's sparse settlement. It's mainly the place of Waco in a growing Texas that's really making a name for itself. It's trying to become a legitimate community first off and survive.
Right.
Yeah.
And as we discussed before, I mean, Waco as a town is relatively small. More people live in the county than actually live in the city of Waco or the town of Waco. And that's because it was an mostly agrarian-driven economy. So why cotton?
Well, I've got to. Can I skip ahead just a minute because I got a quote I want to read you. This is from the 1902. So this is skipping ahead a bit, but it's useful for this conversation, and I found this in reading it. And this might answer your question of why cotton. So this is the 1902 City Directory, and it says it's talking at that point. You know, Waco's become the center of the interior cotton market in Texas. Really, they say in the world in here. 5 compresses, more than 1 million bales handled, and they share this fact. At this Paris exposition in 1900, prizes were offered for the richest sample of soil. The competition was open to the entire world. A committee of experts were appointed as judges, and the committee examined specimens of soil from the valley of the Ganges, the valley of the Nile, the Danube, the Rhine, the Seine, the Thames, the Amazon, the Mississippi, and the Brazos. The latter received the award over all its competitors. The scientific analysis and certificate of award to the Brazos Valley soil is in the possession of the Waco Business Men's Club and can be seen by anyone who will call. So perhaps one reason
we call
is
those bragging rights. Right
yeah,
there,
exactly.
man.
You can come by and see it if you want to. So maybe one reason is just the richness of the soils that existed in the Brazos Valley.
Yeah, that's interesting because you think about we really have a pretty varied, as we've talked about in some of our previous podcasts, varied geology around here. We're kind of on a west of us. It's much more rocky and broken ground. To the east is the Blackland Prairie, and then of course you have the Brazos Valley running through that. And so as cotton production started, it started in that valley land because it was easy to till. It was very fertile. It stayed a lot more moist because it was close to the river. And I think that's where these early plantations really took root, so to speak.
Yeah, and they're based on free labor, based on enslaved labor in the 1850s, and then after the Civil War, they're based on cheap labor with tenant farming and sharecropping. But it is the limit of, that 98th meridian change in rainfall. So it is the limit of that growing belt where you can grow cotton based on natural rainfall.
Yeah, if you look historically, some towns west of us, I think of Hamilton, for instance, they had a cotton economy too.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem there was the soil was a lot thinner and rockier. I don't know if you're familiar with John Graves, the author, wrote Goodbye to a River and another book called Hardscrabble.
Yeah, great books.
Yes, both of them great. He does a great job of describing these settlers that would come get a piece of land. They'd farm cotton on it for a few years till they wore it out, till it got worn out.
Mm-hmm.
Because it would deplete the soil. Cotton was a very intense plant. It takes all the nutrients out of the soil, and then you can't grow anything. And then they would just move on to the next piece of land. So I think you saw that. Eventually, the plows improve. The technology gets better. They were able to break into the Blackland Prairie, get out of the Brazos Valley, get into the Blackland soil, and that also proved to be very useful, a lot better than the rocky ground west of here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we've got, by the 1880s, a booming cotton market. If you were to go down to those old cotton warehouses, we now go there for fajitas and steaks and things like that. But you would have looked out in front of you and seen certain times of the year bales as far as the eye could see, and buyers from all over working the cotton market that existed in Waco.
Yeah. And cotton took a lot of other industries around it. We're recording in a studio just down the road from the silos. And what's, the silos before they became
destination,
a tourism.
Yes.
It was a functioning cottonseed oil.
Yeah, Brazos Valley cottonseed oil mill.
Yeah. You also had compresses, right? Once the train, the Tap Railroad came into Waco in the 1870s, it was a lot more efficient to compress it into bales and then ship it. Well, that was a whole technology that came about to be able to do that compressing locally.
Yeah, and we're going to have Fiona Bond on to talk about Crossroads of Entertainment, but the Cotton Palace Exposition is the ultimate sort of expression of the glory of cotton in Waco. Yeah,
right. And from an economic development standpoint, a great idea for the city leaders, because they could bring in people from all around the region to Waco.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of people every fall coming to this event.
Yeah. Today we say heads in beds. They were just trying to get heads in beds.
That's
and
right.
People spend money. So this 1850 to 1900s. Let's talk about some of the businesses we know were here at the time.
Yeah, I thought you pulled a list from that 1876 handbook you've been using. I think that's a great little sample size to talk about what the economy looked like.
Yeah, and there's a couple things. The one thing I love about this book is it's got advertisements in it. So let me just peruse some of the advertisements so you can kind of see what was going on here. Let's see.
And we're ignoring the reservation, which is another form of
actually we're not going
economic development.
We're not going to ignore it. But you could have gone to Bismarck's Saloon and Billiard Hall. Dealers in all kinds of imported wines, liquors, and cigars. So that was there for you. If you got hungry, you go down to J.W. Brooks Dealer and Groceries. There was Bayou City Ironworks. There's a couple of ironworks in towns because that's how the farm machinery was built. Some of it was shipped in and bought, but a lot of the implements people used had to be made somewhere, and that's what these machinists and farm works did. There's a dentist here, a fashionable tailor, groceries and plantation supplies, wagon yards, bunch of attorneys. Turns out they've been around for a long time.
They have, yeah.
Hardware. Here's my favorite: Northern Lake Ice and soda water.
Yeah, don't get Rick started.
There's an earlier episode if you want to go find out
check
about
that out,
how ice. Because in 1870s, Stephen, they were making ice in Waco, Texas.
They were
I know.
right next door. Or
That's
pretty
right.
close.
Well, pretty close.
Well,
down
the
street.
first one, you're going to have to listen to that episode.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
so
there's
disappointed.
Kris. There's more than you want to know
Gosh,
on there.
so much. So.
I can hardly wait.
It'll make you drink things not on the rocks.
Okay, so you had bakeries, you had a photographer and fine art. So it was 1876. You could go get a photograph and some fine art. Surgeons, lots of mercantile type stuff, livery, feed, stables, hotels. Saddles, harnesses, all the things you would need to live in the 1876 time frame. Boots and shoes, caps and hats.
You mentioned you made a note here of Paget's, which Tom Paget, one of the oldest surviving Waco businesses that's in business for over 100 years there, and many folks listening may have known Wilton Lanning, who descended to Tom Paget.
Yep.
Yeah.
He deserves a tip of the hat.
Definitely.
Mr. Dr. Pepper.
That's right.
Yes, but that business was, I think Tom Paget immigrated, got involved in making saddles somewhere around Houston, and eventually made his way to Waco, and
it was a huge operation.
Grew a huge business out of it. Okay, before I leave the 1876 handbook, I'm going to read. There's a directory. It's the first time they printed a directory of who actually lived in Waco, and they also included not only their name but also their occupation.
I thought you were going to read the entire directory.
No.
Aaron Adamson. Yeah.
So a couple of things I want to point out. Now they also, this is 1876, post Civil War. They also note on here who is of a colored race and who's not.
Yeah, and that persists up through the city directories in the 1920s. There's a C by residents' names.
Yep. So a couple of I'll just read through here. Here's a guy who's a grocer. There's a guy who's talking about a colored servant, colored blacksmith, constable, lawyer, merchant, engineer, boiler maker. Here's one. I thought this was interesting. Colored school teacher. His name, A.J. Moore.
Interesting.
Yeah. Just some of the other professions you see here: machinist, widow, actress.
There was a pretty big vaudeville.
Well, Stephen's got a story on the whole actress
self-employed
thing.
model. I think. Yeah. So I mean, there were women of ill repute that would often go by actresses in the census.
They didn't want to put the other term in the actual directory. Sure. So
get creative.
Yes. Anyway, very interesting to see what people did to make a living. A lot of farmers lived in town, even though their land was out in the country, or they had two houses and went back and forth. But yeah. Exciting time. I mean, the 1870s and 1880s were really big. We're actually recording this.
We are recording it.
March 14th.
Did you just realize this? It's being recorded.
No, I knew it as soon as I walked in the door. But the big news in the last couple of weeks is a bank failed recently.
Yes.
And if you think about the national picture back then, I got a little curious thinking about the current events, and I actually looked up. So in this time period that we're talking about, they had a number of recessions, depressions, and panics.
Yeah.
I think panic is like worse than the depression. Like so there were runs on banks and companies, and so through this 50 years that we're just describing, it wasn't all lollipops. I mean, it was there were a lot of tough things going on the national stage, and you had an economy here that was really built around one thing.
Yeah. And the problem with cotton is you don't control the price at all. It's completely market-driven price, and all you can do is if the price drops is grow more. which affects the price.
Right.
And so,
you don't control the weather,
Yeah.
and you don't control the bugs,
cost of the implements to grow
Yes.
it. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So it's a precarious, balancing act to build your economy on that.
Yeah. In fact, you can extend that out to, that instability and that comes along with cotton as to part of what contributes to its demise, right? As the center of Waco's economy.
Yeah. So as we moved in the 1900s, which is great because really the pinnacle of cotton was probably the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you can, I think, trace the strength of the cotton economy to Waco's success. And so looking at Waco in the early 1900s, it really was a golden age. If you drive through downtown, all the iconic buildings, except the suspension bridge. I mean, that was built in 1870, but the Washington Street Bridge was 1902. The Alico Building, 1910. Let's see. We had the
Praetorian, 1915.
Yeah.
The Roosevelt, the Raleigh. The Roosevelt's a little bit later, but yeah, I think
City Hall, 1930.
Those buildings kind of mark an early heyday for Waco. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think they mark a period of real innovation too for Waco. The Alico building was the first steel frame building built in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So
really west of Mississippi. Yeah,
and it was the tallest building west of the Mississippi and south of the Mason-Dixon line. So that's pretty substantial.
Yeah.
That it was Waco and not Dallas that happened.
Mm-hmm. And now the oldest skyscraper in Texas that's left standing. Historic skyscraper. Yeah.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what happened, right? We were in this heyday.
Yeah.
And then the cotton industry really goes through some tough times. I think through the 20s, there's price pressures, like you mentioned before. There's a lot of foreign competition that wasn't there before.
Mm-hmm.
There was locally, like we talked about, a lot of the land started getting worn out, and it was not producing like it used to. Early 1900s was when the farming really started to open up on the high plains, where I was from in Plainview and in that area. But you had this magical thing there. You had irrigation.
Yeah.
If it didn't rain, you could irrigate your crops and still have a great crop.
Yeah. You had the boll weevil crosses over from Mexico in the 1890s.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact of the day is the boll weevil moves 60 miles a year. So there's kind of this slow march of the boll weevil. So we kind of know when it moves all through Texas and finally ends up, crashing cotton crops in Georgia and South Carolina, eventually on into the 1900s, but extremely devastating to crops.
Yeah. We probably it'd be interesting to go back and look, and if we could talk to people from that time, but knowing that slow march is coming up and it's going to crater your economy or potentially crater your economy, I think that and just the fluctuations that were happening led the city leaders to go, hey, we might need to do something a little different here.
My favorite monument in the American South is in Enterprise, Alabama.
Home of the boll weevil.
Yes.
I've been there.
You've
I've seen
there.
it.
All right.
I've seen the statue.
So Kris is taking
Yes.
a pilgrimage. You got kind of a Statue of Liberty sort of figure holding a boll weevil above her head right downtown. And those people in Enterprise are celebrating the fact that the boll weevil forced them to diversify. You can think of Southerners kind of addicted to cotton. It forced them to diversify. So you've had this religious experience at the boll weevil.
Been to Fort Rucker. I've experienced it all. Yes.
So the boll weevil, among other things, the drought in the 1930s, and of course the ultimate failure of the sharecropping system to work.
Right.
So it leads to some changes.
I have another handbook of Waco And the way I think you need to look at these handbooks, it's like we would do a website today.
Yeah.
The community groups, the chambers of commerce, whatever, they would print up these great handbooks, and they would take them to exhibitions around the country.
Or
to
Kris
other
might
places.
do a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, she would have been handing out these books, but yeah. So let me read this is the 1910 handbook. Again, kind of the middle of that golden age, and this is actually from the Chamber of Commerce section. So I'm in for you, Kris.
And I have to give a plug to the chamber. So our roots go to 1899
Wow,
with the formation
fantastic.
of the Waco Businessmen's Club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank goodness we've changed a little bit.
You wouldn't have a job.
I would not have a job.
Yeah, that is one of the interesting things is I was going through not just the 1876 but the 1910 is especially when commercially it's all men.
Yeah.
And I bet if I really looked into it and knew it's all probably white men. I mean,
Yes.
the way our
Yeah.
culture and society has changed has been extreme over the last 100+ years. So I think we've unleashed a lot more economic potential than we had.
I'm gonna interrupt you for just a second. So I have a really nice historic letter that's on my wall in my office, and
Mm-hmm.
a very kind gentleman named James Talbert gave this to me, and it was from the Waco Businessmen's Club to his uncles, who had placed fourth in the state fair corn growing competition.
Mhm.
Right.
And so it's the letter, and it's the original ribbon, and with it on the letterhead of the envelope has this really great saying on there. But it's a hub and spoke. It's a wagon wheel, and on each one of the spokes is the center, and the hub is Waco, and it says Waco, the hub, and then it has on each spoke
Mhm.
it has a different city or state around
Mhm.
it. So Waco's at the center of all of these things. So even in the early 1900s, 1909, when this letter was written, people were thinking about economic development, but the envelope says the city of unequaled industrial and commercial opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So people were thinking about economic development,
Mm-hmm.
even at the earliest points of Waco's formation.
Right. And I don't know this, but again, just they're looking at all their neighbors in Texas and going, we don't have those oil wells.
Mhm.
What are
Right.
we going to do?
Exactly.
And cotton is declining.
Yeah.
They could see the handwriting on the wall. So, yeah. So from that, this excerpt again from the handbook about the Chamber of Commerce. During the past 5 years, its labors have been varied. He's talking about the Chamber of Commerce. It has stood ready to assist in every good work for the development which is so marked in the Waco of today, and has borne its part in all, whether it has been an earnest effort in raising the $110,000 endowment fund, which helped give better educational facilities at Baylor. And we're still raising money for Baylor, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right.
That was Waco Hall.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was securing the Katy shops, so those were
Train shops, yeah.
train shops,
Mhm.
yeah. So industry, they're getting industry here. The interurban between Dallas and Waco. So the interurban
Mhm.
railway, that's when it came in. And whether it's been the success of the Cotton Palace, the new $650,000 hotel, the current hotel's being built in Waco, that doesn't even pay for the plumbing. I'm just or in the campaign, which has been just closed for good roads, and the issuance of over $1 million in good roads bonds, which will be used in the building of a total of 185 miles of good roads in the precincts of McLennan County.
Hmm. And what year was that?
So that's 1910.
Okay. Very interesting.
Yeah. Ties back to when we talked about that Good Road Society
Mm-hmm.
and where that came out of. And then skipping down a little bit, it says, with view to this work, the Chamber of Commerce has gone on record as offering the sum of $100,000 to be awarded as a bonus or used in securing sites for factories in Waco.
Hmm.
So they were thinking ahead.
Mm-hmm. And I think you listed also some of those industries that would have been kind of operating in the early 1900s.
Right. So these were some of those kind of primary industries. In fact, it's some of them that they tout that they attracted to Waco.
Mm-hmm.
So medicine production became a big deal. So Tawa's Remedy Company and Merrick Medicine.
Yep, the Percy Medicine Company.
Yes.
Yep.
That's right. Percy Baby Medicine.
Yes.
Originally. So just in case you got
And
confused.
that business, I mean, I think it changed names, but it survived for many years, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Waco. Circle A carbonated drinks.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just did a podcast on.
We did, from the Dr. Pepper Museum, on their new exhibit on the people who made Dr. Pepper. Go check it out.
Yeah. This was an interesting one. The Barton Dynashine factory was attracted in 1919.
The Shoe Shine Company.
It's a shoe shine company, and he had like a 6-acre factory here, and it was a big deal. But then he left in 1927.
What happened?
I'm not sure. He moved it to St. Louis, was all what I read, but I guess people didn't shine their shoes anymore. There was incredible foresight, like we talked about in the military crossroads, of going after Camp MacArthur and getting that here. That business leaders went to D.C. and lobbied to get that camp here, which doubled the size of Waco. I mean, at its peak, and you think about what drives an economy, people. You know, there's that correlation we talked about earlier, and so.
And innovation of having airfields here that the Great War brings as well.
Yeah. You know, after we did that military crossroads episode, I'm like, how many airfields were there actually in America at the time? How unique was it that Waco got an airfield? And I went and found that at that point they had authorized 23 airfields in all of the U.S.
That's
military airfields.
Yeah, so very rare.
Yeah, the military was the main one flying, so it wasn't like there were a bunch of municipal fields anywhere else. So,
and that point, aviation was still really young, and so it was unusual for people to see an airplane flying. So it was a marvel at that time.
Yeah, you're right. I was reading accounts of people who would just drive out to the airfield and sit there all day and watch. And I was reminded of that last night or yesterday. I was doing some work out at my farm, and I don't live too far from, or that the farm's not too far from McGregor Airport. And I still look up every time a plane flies over. It's a natural reaction. And I've been around airplanes my whole life.
Well, we talked about it a little bit in that episode, but someone I work with talked about taking their son out to SpaceX, and he wanted to touch something that's going to go to space. So just the idea of that versus the idea of seeing a plane, seeing something go airborne when that seems so completely foreign and unreal.
Think about it. There's people who grew up in log cabins on the frontier, probably still didn't have running water in their house, had maybe fought with hostile Indians, and all of a sudden a plane flies over them. Yeah. I mean, that just would blow your mind.
So just having that advanced technology just in town, that sort of innovation here.
Yeah. Okay, the first heavy industry that was brought to Waco was the Atlas Portland Cement Company in 1928. And it's
still
here today.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's called it's changed names now. It's Lehigh. And it's out on 84, a little bit past Woodway.
But we need to do something for the 100th, Chris. I mean, their 100th is coming up here pretty soon.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Some of the data talked about between 1920 and 1930, manufacturing industry increased by a third. So it really was, like we said, there was an effort, like we just read a little bit about in the book. They were offering incentives, trying to get more industry here, and it worked. But then something happened about 1929.
That's right. Much like me, the country went into a Great Depression.
Right. And we felt it here just like everybody else. Just don't go into a panic, okay?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Okay,
I'm fine.
All right.
Yeah, so that there's such a contrast between the 30s and 40s. I mean, what happens in the 1930s and 40s? I mean, we talk about that. I mean, they've been labeled the greatest generation, that generation that kind of encounters the Great Depression, and they're going to encounter World War II. And we're not going to get into the dynamics of waging World War II, but what's important to know domestically is, and this is a stat I share with my students, so usually people get overcharged tuition to hear this, so you're getting it for free. So the federal government, if you take the Washington administration through the first 6 years, 7 years of the FDR administration, and you combine all the money the federal government spends, they're going to spend more than that between 1942 and 1945. So there is this massive infusion of money into the economy. And of course, it all goes into heavy industry and manufacturing. So
And the build out of infrastructure.
Yeah. And so we see it. We
Waco
see
was
it here.
absolutely a beneficiary of that.
Yeah. So we see that impact here locally.
Yeah. In fact, between 1940 and 48, there was over $32 million of investment in heavy industrial, which was a 365% increase of what was here.
You got your calculator out for that one.
I just did it in my head real quick. But the
so what if we want to put some names to that?
Some of those businesses are still here, or some of them leave a shadow because they're not here anymore. But Owen, Illinois, the glass plant came in 1943. It was $1 million investment. And
it was a big deal.
Yeah. No, it was massive. Even bigger was the General Tire plant that came in 1945, and at its peak had over 1,000 employees.
That's going to become at its peak the largest employer in Waco, I believe. Yeah. Big employer.
And
we talked about the Bluebonnet Ordnance Plant that continues to have life in some ways as part of SpaceX, but that's 1942, and that's going to have a long life as well.
Right. We also had mentioned in that military Crossroads episode the federal investment in bases here. Right. So we not just Bluebonnet, but we ended up getting 3 other bases out of here. Blackland, Conley, and what am I forgetting?
So we have Blackland, we have Connolly, and we had
Bluebonnet.
Yeah, that's the main. I can't think of anything beyond.
Yeah.
That.
So again, those not only brought the actual investment of infrastructure and facilities, but the people that help drive the local economy.
So if you're a newcomer to Waco, when you drive by the BRIC, the Baylor Research Innovation Collaborative, that's General Tire is what you're driving by.
Yeah, so that'll pick up in our more modern part of the economy in a minute.
I bet Kris will have something to say about that.
Well, I actually do have something to say about General Tire and Owens. They when those 2 plants were operating at full capacity in 1945, they had over 2,000 employees between the 2 of them, and that accounted for over half of the industrial labor force of Waco.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's a huge concentration in 2 companies.
And
then we
amazing.
felt the impact when General Tire closed. That was a big hit to the community for sure.
Right. And Waco at the time was only 50,000 people. You got to remember that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, as primary sector jobs. I mean, these are 2,000 primary sector jobs. We've got to think of the multiplier effect of those 2,000 jobs.
Yeah.
Right?
So they talk about in manufacturing that one primary sector manufacturing job will create an additional 5 jobs.
Wow.
That it may not all be local, but they will generate an additional 5 jobs. And then locally, it's usually, around 2.5 jobs.
Wow.
Right.
So that's amazing. Yeah. Big impact.
Okay. So that really gets us to the post-World War II era. And so the 1950s starts off with, probably one of the most devastating things you could do to a local economy.
Yeah, the Waco tornado, May 11th, 1953, and just the devastation of that in human lives and property and investment and infrastructure, downtown, you could argue, still has the thumbprint of the Waco tornado. An F5 tornado hits a major downtown, and you can listen to that podcast episode to learn more about that. But for these concerns here, huge economic consequences from that tornado.
Right. So at the time, besides the 114 dead and 597 injured, you had 41 million in property damage, and this helps put it in perspective. 196 businesses and factories were destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, it's also where it happens, right? It's downtown, it's the urban core, and this is during an era where money isn't coming into the urban core as much as it's going into other places. Right. And so, downtown, getting traction from it is going to be an issue.
Right. And during that time, downtown was still the lifeblood of cities.
Mm-hmm.
We're different now with suburbs and the way cities are developed, but then that was a tough blow. And you mentioned this a minute ago with the Greatest Generation. I think this post World War II period, you did have a bunch of these young men and women come back from all over the world, and they were invigorated with a different idea of pushing their communities forward.
Mm-hmm.
And we benefited from that in Waco. We have talked about some of the big infrastructure projects that happened post World War II, whether it was the Lake Waco Dam, the big dam going in, even educationally when we talked about MCC
mm-hmm.
and TSTC, some of these big rocks that started getting moved in our community that have had a long-lasting impact. Well, one of those, and I'd love for Kris to dive into this one for us, was something that eventually became what's called the Waco Industrial Foundation. It started off a little differently, though.
Right.
But in 1952, these local leaders got together and they were thinking about economic development, Kris.
Yeah. So after Owens, Illinois came into the community, I mentioned before that economic development has really been on the mindset of Waco since its formation. And these local business leaders said, we really need to be more competitive when it comes to attracting business. And I said, we've got a lot of things going for us, but we don't have land. Mm-hmm. We don't have any sites that we can put in front of somebody. So you had
we had land, but it wasn't ready, right? Explain what that means.
Yeah, certainly there was land available in Waco, but when a company is looking for a place to go, they want it to be what's called shovel ready. So they want something that's going to be easy to develop. It's going to have access to the infrastructure it needs, whether that's roads or water and sewer, electricity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are all the things that a company needs, including people, right? So we had people, we had an abundancy of land, but we didn't necessarily have all of the other assets that needed to bring those businesses here. So you had a group of businesses and business leaders within the community, and a lot of them were banks that came together and formed what eventually became the Waco Industrial Foundation. And it was originally a for-profit organization. So they put together, you bought shares for $1. You had a minimum of 25 shares that you had to buy. They raised some money.
$25. Yeah.
Yes, you had to put $25 in to be in. And with this, you had these folks that were really trying to figure out, okay, we'll put this money together. We'll go out, we'll buy some land, and then we will sell the land at a profit. Take those profits and generate more activity by buying more land, but we'll be bringing in new businesses at the same time. And so the competition started getting more and more robust across other communities too. They saw what was happening in Waco, and these guys said, we really need to be even more competitive. And this for-profit model's not working for us. So we should switch over into a nonprofit. So on February 26, 1958, the Waco Industrial Foundation, as we know it, was formed and became a nonprofit Texas corporation. So our mission, so the chamber serves as the staff for the Industrial Foundation.
And you're the actual director, right?
Nope. Matt Metters is the executive vice president.
Who is the president of the Chamber of Commerce?
Yes, he's the president of the
Great
Chamber of
Waco.
Commerce, and he directs our team as staff for the foundation.
Gotcha.
So we work closely with the board and the executive committee, and really this really helped establish what we call the three-legged stool of economic development in Waco and McLennan County. So you have the city coming in as a partner, you have the county coming in, and then the private business sector through the Industrial Foundation to bring land to the table. And
So-
that's been a huge benefit for us.
So is it accurate to say it operates like a land bank? It's got land stored away for this purpose to use.
If
to
that's
leverage.
wrong, let him know.
I would say that we are more like in a sense, more like a private developer, only we're not in it to generate a profit for anyone but the community. It's from that sense.
Okay.
So we're holding on to land as an asset and using it and developing it out and putting the infrastructure in place to attract new prosperity into the community.
Okay, so what was this story about a Mystery Acres?
Oh, Mystery Acres. So apparently this was all the buzz of the community for quite some time. There was a level of acreage that was being acquired. Nobody knew what it was for, but eventually 2,000 acres was acquired, and it was all put under the name of this secretary at a law firm in Kansas City, Missouri. And the land just stayed fallow for a long time. And a local real estate broker said, this is ridiculous. We've got an opportunity here with this. And there was a local attorney that was working on behalf of the landowner. Never disclosed who the client was, but there were lots of rumors. There's going to be a huge auto plant that comes in. It's going Ford or GM's going to announce any day, and never happened. So we never know what Mystery Acres was meant to be, but we do know that it has generated a huge opportunity for this community.
So for the listeners, describe where that is.
So-
and the WIF did acquire this land eventually, right?
Eventually, the WIF did acquire it in the early 1960s, acquired 2,000 acres for $1 million. But you have to understand, WIF didn't have any money. So how are you going to buy this land for $1 million and not have any money? And it was through some creative banking that some of that occurred. We had
I think that's going on right now.
Yeah,
in Silicon
that's
Valley.
right. Fiscally unsound and creative. There's such a fine line.
well, at the end of the day, there was at least an asset, right?
Yeah.
So there was some security there versus things like cryptocurrency where
Right.
But when we think about so Mystery Acres, if you think about the area along Franklin Avenue, from Valley Mills to Franklin, along Franklin, all the way down to what's now Texas Central Parkway.
Okay.
So originally 2,000 acres,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about it now, it's just it's pretty developed. But
Yeah.
at that point, it was just open land,
Right.
and so.
I think one of the things that made it attractive too is it had two rail lines running through it.
It did. Well, it's both. Now the Union Pacific.
Right.
There's a main line and a spur that runs, and that is the line that converges and comes through downtown Waco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from an industrial development
Yeah.
standpoint, you listed off a whole nother set of utilities, and rail would be another one.
And at that point, rail was very, very active in this market. So it was a huge asset to be able to take advantage of. And then you had the highway system starting to build out. You had Highway 84
Right.
that was that was adjacent to the land too. Would eventually become Highway 6, and then Interstate 35 connectivity as well. So I mean, it was a really smart play on the behalf of the foundation to acquire that land.
Okay, so they get this land in 1960 and they fill it up like overnight with
No.
companies.
No, and it's not always, just having the asset. It takes a lot of time. But they did some creative things where, as they sold land, they were able to release the acreage from the banks. They had an agreement with the city of Waco. So at that point, the utilities were really willing to come to the table and help build out. So you had the highway department, you had the gas company, you had the power company that were willing to come and bring the infrastructure to the land as part of the partnership. And then the city of Waco would agree not to annex the business for 5 years as part of the incentive. So the avoidance of city taxes for 5 years,
Right.
and then they would annex them in. So there was lots of creative things that were happening, but I thought it was, as I was reviewing and preparing for this conversation, the thing that always stuck out to me is how people, even in the early 1900s, and as the foundation moved together, everybody talked about partnership. I think that's something that it just continues to be part of our DNA and resonates generationally for us.
So yeah, what were their early wins? What are some companies that we would recognize today that came out of this early effort?
Yeah, so some of those, you can still drive down. Imperial at the time was a gravel road,
Right.
and so working with the city was able to pave the road. But Marathon Norco was one of the early wins. It came in the early 1970s.
Aviation batteries, right?
Aviation batteries. You had what's now Packaging Corporation of America, which was Louis Englander's Englander Container, came in 1972, moved from First Street in downtown Waco, and bought 6 acres in the industrial park to build his building. Because he said, my customers are going to be in the industrial park. I need to be near my customers. So that was one of the other great wins. Mars Wrigley, as we know it now. So M&M Mars. That had
to have been huge.
That was a huge project, but the story behind it is really interesting. So, of course, we didn't have email and all the things back in the early 70s. The inquiry about the land came on a postcard with no company name. We are interested in your community. And so for months, there was a conversation back and forth with this company and these representatives on the end of the phone that they never knew who it was. And eventually they found out that it was Mars, and everybody was really excited, but they had lots of interesting names, but they were like, is this the mafia on the other end? Because they were New Yorkers. They could tell they were New Yorkers, but that was about all that they could tell.
The chocolate mafia.
And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun, but going back and seeing some of those records and, it's old photostatic copies and highlights of maps and things, and just the level of innovation that went on even then, and compared to, the technology that we have access to now is incredible.
Right. I look at some other ones that come to mind, and I don't know what their original names were because they've changed over years. But Howmet.
Yep. So originally Huck Fastening Systems.
Okay.
And it's changed names a couple of times. You know them as Alcoa and
we had
Arconic. We
Levi.
had
Levi Strauss.
Levi Strauss, which is now, was Coca-Cola up until about a year and a half ago, and it's now Refresco. You have Time Manufacturing that was founded and formed here, which also had
a local company.
Spin-off business with Waco Boom.
Capstone Mechanical.
Capstone Mechanical.
That wasn't until much later. It's not Allergan anymore.
It's AbbVie now.
AbbVie.
Yes. but pharmaceutical manufacturing, I mean, just really, really diverse in the manufacturing that's come here. But that was been intentional too. When the General Tire facility closed in the early 1980s, that was a devastating blow to the economy.
Right.
And the community leadership said, never again can we have that happen. So we have to be more intentional and better diversified in our economy.
So you hinted to this a minute ago when you started talking about the highways that eventually almost surround the industrial park. There was a transformation. I think we went from maybe a rail-based economy to all of a sudden trucking became probably the main mover for goods, which then all of a sudden, going back to our Crossroads premise here, and you look at where Waco is in the state of Texas, all of a sudden, not only from a manufacturing standpoint is Waco attractive, but now a logistics standpoint, warehousing, stuff like that being at this point in the state is a huge advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about the crossroads of Waco. You have Highway 6 and Interstate 35 that serve as a huge crossroads of logistical activity, and that's really attractive to businesses. They can reach their customer base within a relatively short period of time. They can get to multiple states within a 200-mile radius, and then the cost of logistics fluctuates, and sometimes the cost of rail is less expensive than it is to truck, depending on lengths of time and distances. But always, I mean, you have to be able to access your business within a short period, and so that's always been a feather in our cap when we talk about what are the advantages of Waco versus other places.
Yep. So before we leave this time period and step into the 2000s, there's a little footnote that I find interesting. We may mention it on one of the other podcasts, but in 1996, there's this company called Beale Aerospace that this I think a developer out of Dallas had this grand idea of launching satellites, and so he needed somewhere to test rockets. So he found out that at the old Bluebonnet Ordnance Plant, they were already kind of set up environmentally because they tested Rocketdyne, had been out there for years. Their clearances were there to test rockets. Goes and builds a test stand, and then goes out of business pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah. So
that was 1996.
1996, and then just 8 short years later, you had SpaceX coming in, but in the midst of that, you had Hercules that came through and did engine testing out at the what's now the McGregor Industrial Park. So that land was the Bluebonnet Ordnance Facility. It was eventually released from the Navy, went through a environmental cleaning process, and it was the prototype for how the Navy and the EPA go through and do all of the cleanup work for turning over property. And so they've now turned that over to the city of McGregor. McGregor uses it as an asset to help attract industry into the more rural part of McLennan County. And then you have this asset that was just sitting out there, this tripod, this rocket testing tripod. And the story goes that Elon Musk was looking for a place that he could test these engines that were being developed for his commercial space business, and happened upon McGregor. And but for that tripod being there, we would not have SpaceX in this community. And so it started out with less than 100 acres, about 100 acres, and 2 employees. And, now there are 4,400 acres and over 600 employees, plus suppliers that are coming in on a daily basis and contractors. And it's a huge economic engine for the community.
Yeah.
And every engine that goes into space comes through McGregor.
And we hear every engine.
And that's
goes
okay.
into
You know
space.
what? You should just be super proud of
Oh,
that.
I love it.
Every time I hear that sound, I should be grateful.
That's right.
That's what I
That's
feel,
right.
yeah.
Well, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good.
Absolutely.
So-
We'll take it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going
Yeah.
with the Waco economy 2000 on. Bring us to today, because man, we talked about a golden age in the early 1900s. I mean, I may be a little biased, but I feel like we're in a golden age now of growth and expansion and even more diversification of our economy.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a really successful run of economic development. We kind of use 2005 as the benchmark year to look at, and so over the last 18 years, which is a crazy thing to say, 18 years, it's been pretty steady development where we were having years around 100 to 120 million dollars worth of investment, which is a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
We were averaging about 500 jobs adding a year. Pretty diverse in the types of businesses, from professional services to manufacturing to the logistics, aerospace. We've had a lot of growth in that particular industry as well. And then I'd say, 2015, we got through the Great Recession.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2015, really the economy here started taking off. And then the weird thing was you would think that when the pandemic hit that the economy would have just plummeted for us and that economic development would have just gone down the tubes. And it ended up being the most successful year we had ever had.
Wow.
You had Amazon that came in that year.
Mm-hmm.
We had a number of other projects that came through. And we had a $400 million year in the midst of a pandemic.
Wow.
Stephen, footnote to that year. You know who the chamber chairman was that year?
Maybe he was mainly operating on the coattails of previous leaders, but I think it was you, right?
Yes, and I can take absolutely no credit. For the
Well,
good
you didn't
work that Kris did.
You didn't blow it up,
But
yeah.
Yeah.
but it was an exceptional time. I mean that, yeah.
And then the next year we outdid that. So 2021 with over $500 million year. So I mean we've in a 2-year period, in a 24-month period, we had more economic development activity, $1 billion worth of activity that took us 9 years to get before that.
Wow.
So just from an acceleration perspective, it's just been unbelievable. And then, last year was more of a normalized year, but then we started 2023 off and we've already had $1 billion announcement.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the largest announcement we've ever had for a single project.
Yeah, what company is that?
This Graphic Packaging International.
Mm-hmm.
So
This is the German company.
this is a U.S. based company. They do paper products.
I see. I don't stay up on current events.
No,
so.
you're good. But in the midst of all of these projects that we've had, we've seen this huge influx of foreign direct investment into the community too, and I think that's a great thing. Because it just further diversifies. But you see more and more companies that are interested in being in the U.S. because of things that happened as a result of COVID. They couldn't access their customer base, and they couldn't get across borders, so they needed to be closer. So that's been an opportunity. You and I talked about that in the middle of COVID, about what are the opportunities that Waco could take advantage of, and I think we've absolutely been looking at reshoring opportunities as part of that.
And another loop I want to close there. Where did the paper company? Where's it going to locate?
In part, well, not in Mystery Acres.
Oh, okay.
It's not in Mystery. It's additional land adjacent to Mystery Acres.
To what was Mystery Acres?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But really close.
Absolutely,
like on
the other side of the creek.
Yeah.
Are we still developing Mystery Acres?
There is a little bit of land left in Mystery Acres. There's probably about 500 acres left. So not a lot.
Not a lot, but man,
Yeah.
think of the foresight in 1952.
Yeah.
I don't know the reasons, all the indicators and drivers of this boom, but it always seems to me Waco just has so much capacity where other places in Texas did not have capacity.
I think part of it is, to Rick's point, there's been a lot of foresight in this community. So you had people that had foresight to say, we need land. You had people that said, from a foresight perspective, say, we need to make sure that the interstate is coming through our community and doesn't bypass us. We need to have access to water and resources. So you've had, we stand on the shoulders of people that had great vision, and we, hopefully we're able to leave a legacy for others to come.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that the bow I'd want to tie on that, and Kris can help me describe this. The Department of Labor describes every MSA by they break it down into 10 areas of your economy. Help me. That's like leisure and hospitality is one.
Right. Manufacturing, education and government, healthcare. You have all the different industries are broken into a variety of categories.
Right. So there's 10 main ones.
Right.
So if you look at the Waco MSA, we have 6 of those categories that are more than 10% of our economy. So back when
diversification.
So when COVID hit, I'd seen that chart a million times in chamber meetings, and I thought, oh, that's great. How does that really compare?
Mm-hmm.
So I started digging around and looking at the other MSAs in Texas. Everyone else, some had only 2. Midland, Odessa, you had oil and gas and something else, finances or something like that, financial. But most of the rest of them had 3 or 4. We were the only one with 6, and that diversified economy paid huge dividends through COVID, coming out of COVID.
Yeah, we were the first MSA in the state of Texas to reach pre-pandemic levels
of employment.
Of employment. I mean, so that we think that was part of that diversification.
Texas 7th in the nation, if I remember right. Right.
That's right.
So, wow. So going back 100 years to our, or more, to these guys in these handbooks talking about cooperation and talking about getting factories and realizing they got to change over from a cotton economy to something else. The men and women that came back from wherever they served in World War II and had a new sense of what they could do and maybe a bigger worldview, and then they started some of these long-term investments. I mean, how awesome is that we're reaping these rewards now? And I guess I'm almost a little bit scared too. I'm like, are we having that same forethought for those in the future generations? So, Kris, tell me you're having some of that forethought.
Yeah, absolutely. I was having this conversation with someone earlier today about, the evolution of business. And so, for instance, manufacturing has changed a lot. Owens, Illinois, when it came in, had 900 employees. It has 350 now. So that's the change. The change of equipment and automation and just efficiencies. And we have a power plant here and a power plant generally would have hundreds of employees. They operate with less than 100.
Right.
So I mean, this the difference is there. And so, what's our opportunity? Because we have a pretty high concentration in manufacturing, and so if these companies are going to continue to evolve and become more efficient and include automation in their processes, what are we going to do from a community perspective to ensure that we still have quality jobs and opportunities for people to be employed? So, it's investing in education and upskilling of individuals, but it's also making sure that we're not, that companies aren't falling behind. And that they're looking at, are they investing in innovation, in innovative ways to grow their business, partnering with Baylor and the Brick and helping them create new opportunities too, and looking at new product development and testing and looking at new ways in which they can new markets for their business too.
Right.
So I think those are the things that are on my mind when it comes to how are we going to have this insurance policy of sorts for our community rolling forward.
That's definitely one of the takeaways of our whole discussion. It has evolved over time. And if you stop evolving or you think you've made it, something bad's going to happen, right? I mean, there's probably very few of those companies. I can only think of a few on my hands that were here at the beginning of the 1900s that are still around.
And if they're here, they're not doing the same thing.
They've evolved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this was great. Kris, anything you wanted to get in that we talked too much and didn't let you?
No, I think y'all did a great job. I walked away learning something new today too. So.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah. Well, it was great having you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Waco History Podcast. Like what you heard? Subscribe, rate, and review our show on iTunes so we can reach more listeners. You can find show notes and info on every episode at wacohistorypodcast.com and more info on Waco's past at wacohistory.org. Our theme music, used with permission, is Cross the Brazos at Waco, performed by the late Billy Walker. For more info on Billy's music, go to billywalker.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. This has been a Rogue Media Network production.